So thank you for joining us today for this little info session about our community engaged and service learning course development grants. My name is Claire Swigert. I'm the program director for high impact practices in the Office of Academic Enrichment. And that includes the service learning and community engaged learning unit. Today, just to go through our agenda, I'm going to briefly describe what our grant program is, some of the application details, those sort of logistics concerns, but then we're going to turn to the main point of today's presentation, which is to allow you to hear directly from some of our instructors who have used community engaged service learning pedagogy, and who have, engaged in some of the support services that our area provides, including our course development, our course design institute, our course development grant. And then we will also have time for some question and answer. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A box. We also can have people unmute when we get to the Q&A session, but if you think of something in the middle of the presentations and you want to get it answered, go ahead and type it into the Q&A box so you don't forget, and so that we make sure that we get those answered. So our presenters this afternoon, we've got Dr. Zach Hooten, who will talk to us about a course in EHE. We've got Dr. Chris Radcliffe, who is in the College of Engineering, and then Dr. Nicole Patson, who teaches a psych course, so arts and sciences. So we've got a diverse group of instructors here from all sorts of different colleges. Oh, and I should also mention that Dr. Patson is at the Marion campus. So we'll also be providing some perspective on what this might look like in the different contexts at some of the regional campuses. All right, so with that, let me just fill in the fundamentals here of what our course development grants are. So we provide grants of up to $4,000 for the development of community engaged courses. So this can be a totally brand new from scratch, developing a new course, or it can be taking an existing course and creating like a new version of it that utilizes community engaged service learning pedagogy. We only, because we have a small amount of funding, so we only give a course, this grant, once. So we strive to support one-time costs for establishing, creating a course. So some of the things that folks might use this for, some faculty use it to pay themselves like a summer stipend, or potentially go towards buying them out of a credit hour of teaching or something like that, so that they give themselves some more time to spend developing the community partner relationship and developing the course materials. We have had folks utilize the funding to hire a graduate student to help prepare the course materials and build the relationships. Or we've had people buy like kits of supplies that can be used repeatedly anytime the course is offered. But one-time costs, for example, something like covering the transportation for students to get to a service site, or paying for like food at an end of course celebration or something like that, those kind of costs that are going to be recurring every time the course is offered. It's not something we would really be looking to support with this grant, because we want you to have a plan for how those things can continue once the grant is no longer there to support it. So as I mentioned, we have a course design institute that is specifically designed for community engaged and service learning courses. That has been designed in partnership with the Drake Institute and their Course Design Institute platform. And so being a grantee does require that you participate in our CDI. And then also speaking of the budget and what those funds are going to, we do ask that at least 10% of the requested funds in your application go to your community partner to acknowledge and support them in their role as co-educators and, taking on that commitment of working with your students. So the applications are not due until Sunday, January 22nd at 11:59 p.m. So you have some time. We like to, get the info out there so that instructors have time to develop their proposal and really start having conversations with potential community partners and really have a good concrete idea so that they can come into our Course Design Institute in May and really be prepared to put together a good course. So I've got the links here to our website where you can find the grant. And our website is service-learning.osu.edu. That did change a few years ago. So if you haven't been to our website lately, definitely encourage you to check that out. We have a lot of good information there, lots of different resources about teaching service learning or community engaged learning, and then of course the grant application. And we also have a page that describes each of the sections of the application in detail to help guide you through that application. So this is just a screenshot of what our website looks like. You want to go to the faculty and staff tab, and then the bottom option on the drop down from there is the course development grants, and that's where you'll find all our info. So with that said, again, please feel free to put any questions about those sort of logistic concerns in the Q&A, but we're going to turn it over now to Zach, and he will talk to us about his leadership and community service course that he taught.
Great. Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Claire, for hosting this wonderful session. Like she said, I'm Zach Hooten. I recently graduated from the Higher Education Student Affairs doctoral program here at Ohio State. And during my time, I had the opportunity to teach within our leadership minor. And I taught leadership in community service, ESCISA 2571S. And my first slide here describes our course goals and expected learning outcomes. I wanted to highlight a couple points on this page as I think they're important, right? When we talk about knowledge, skills, and competencies for responsible service and leadership in diverse communities, those align really directly with some of the best practices of service and or community engaged learning. And I'll touch on this idea of leadership and responsible service and how we navigated going into spaces that were not ours, right? How we navigated Ohio State students, building relationships and completing, tasks and services when in communities that they were not members of. And that was really important conversation that lasted from the first day of class until the final reflections. And then the particular outcomes, skills learned in the academic settings, they demonstrate the understanding of issues, resources, assets within the community that they are working, which is highly important. And then lastly, and a major component of community engaged service learning is this idea of evaluation and reflection. And you'll see some examples of that as I move forward. So next slide, please. So the course structure, when I was reflecting on the couple of years that I taught this class, I really boiled down to giving students the opportunity for internal reflection on who they are and what they bring to the spaces in which they exist, external knowledge about their city, the spaces, the people within those cities and spaces, and then a real emphasis on relationships and how relationship can drive our best practice and what we do when it comes specifically to service and community engagement related to a course structure like this. So next slide, please. And this course was part of the leadership minor. And so we grounded much of this learning within the social change model. And as you can see by that first bullet point there, the social change model is concerned with affecting change on behalf of others and society. So it's really a deep look at how our actions and how our decision-making within particular spaces influence and impact how we interact with others. And there's this idea of change, and it's a collaborative process and based on values. And that last slide, it's a powerful vehicle for developing students' leadership skills. So we had a really great interplay between deconstructing the notions of service and what that looks like, paired with this idea of how can we collaborate, how can we get to know ourselves with this consciousness of self, and how can we reflect on that red circle to the right, that idea of citizenship, and how can we be responsible citizens in a city, specifically here in Columbus, that is relatively riddled with systemic issues, as we know many of our cities are. So that really grounded much of our conversation and gave students an opportunity to see different ways to apply what they were learning in class. Next slide, please. So that first kind of course structure was this idea of internal reflection. And this was a really great opportunity for students to reflect and do some writing and some conversing on their personal history. Where do they come from, and what do they believe, and why do they believe it? And we did many different activities. One of their favorites that I remember, it's called a Where I Am From poem. It's a guided kind of question answer, kind of fill in the blank. And it really gives them an opportunity to reflect not only on themselves, but on their familial history, their location that they grew up in, and then moving on to kind of their personal paradigms and identity development. And you'll see to the right, the social identity wheel, where we have, this is used a lot, where students can kind of reflect on their race and ethnicity and their belief structures, and kind of begin to have those conversations around how my identities and how my, personal beliefs may bring about actions, and where's, more importantly, when we're dealing with that critical consciousness issue, where do those beliefs come from and why do I believe it, right? So it's really important, I think, for students to be able to talk about what they believe and then work in a safe environment to drill down into, well, this is why I believe what I believe, right? Especially now in a time in divisiveness and real judgment about people's belief structures. I think it's important that we can ground ourselves in this idea of conversation and personal reflection to get to a point of, this is why, this is my why. And then when we're working to grow and maybe change perspectives, we can start from that place of why and begin from there. So next slide, please. And so we contextualize that in what I labeled as external knowledge. And so here we talked about the components of service and what does it mean to be engaged in community service or engaged in a community neighborhood or environment, and how to do so responsibly, right? And within the context of Columbus, and this is a picture from the 1930s of a residential security map that then we overlaid the highway system and some other modern day maps and to discuss the history of redlining and how urban flight had an influence on more urban areas, and that had a direct impact on funding and growth and property value. And so we were able to discuss real tangible issues of systemic problems within the city of Columbus, which then helped contextualize the need for these community offerings, these community centers, and the whether it be the food banks, the services that the libraries provide. So really what this did is this helped students contextualize the complex and complicated history of the city of Columbus specifically, and the societal structural issues, how that rolls into systemic inequalities that have lasted over generations, which brings in conversations of wealth and opportunity and privilege, going back to then their identities, and then can start to begin to look at how they have benefited from structures, or maybe how they have not benefited from systemic, structures based on particular identities that they may hold. And next slide, please. And lastly, the relationship piece is a really important one, because we do service and we engage with communities in relationships. And that's ultimately the goal of my course. We would begin from day one with, you are not entering these spaces as a savior. You're not entering these spaces to fix or to save any of what's going on. Sure, you can go in and complete an important service. You can organize what needs to be organized. You can help with administrative tasks. But ultimately, the part of the goal of this is to recognize and be in a human relationship with other people, to really deconstruct belief structures and systems that may be ill-informed. And these relationships really get to the heart of how community engaged and service learning has a reciprocal relationship to each of the individuals involved. So the administrators at the service at the service sites, they were benefiting from particular services being done and growing in relationship, and the patrons, whether it be the children who went to the library for homework help, or the individuals who went to the community centers in Clintonville, they were able to share their stories and grow in relationship with our students, who then also shared their stories. And so there was a connection of humanity there, and those were really the important learning points. And it really helped, like I said, deconstruct harmful stereotypes of and about people who often attend and use communities like food pantries or community centers. And so we took a lot of opportunities to reflect in class. We had a lot of class conversations, online posts that I would bring into the classroom, so that they could have opportunities to reflect by themselves and then with one another. And what was really powerful, I think, is that these conversations also ultimately resulted in the students coming together to support one another in what they were learning, and how their ideas, and when I use that word paradigm, how it shifted, how their perspectives of people living in and around the city of Columbus really shifted. And they learned how privilege and oppression play out on a personal level, because often of these relationships and the people that they met at these places, that, yes, I said they were, going to engage with the community and complete a task or a service, but also, by experiencing the humanity of these places, they grew in appreciation for other individuals, but also grew in their knowledge of systemic issues that kind of persist throughout many of our cities. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And I'll just start to talk about some particular outcomes. So there are many outcomes for the instructor, right? I think community engaged service learning can be really powerful for the instructor. We have really great resources to follow a framework for how to be successful, and how to engage, and how to engage with students beyond kind of course content, but rather put into action the theoretical. I think that's a really powerful point. And the idea of engaged students in the application of what they're learning in class to a particular space, to growth, and lastly, seeing students recognize their own growth and learning was by far the biggest takeaway for me, which was really powerful. Students, one quick story, I had a student near the end of class who was working in a community center in Clintonville, and he was talking about how he had assumptions of the types of people that used community services like this. And he was talking to somebody at one point, and this individual that he was talking to was talking about wanting a new cell phone and being able to do, to access this new technology. And when the student was talking about this experience in class, he said this totally kind of widened my understanding of individuals who use services that we offer in our community, because he said, I was thinking that these people were just poor and they came and all that they could have at their disposal was what they needed, right? And so by this conversation, he was like, well, of course this person deserves a cell phone. Of course this person deserves, nice clothing and good shoes, not just what's left over, but rather like he began to see the humanity of this person and the complexity of these systems and how these people and these individuals live within these systems. And just people are full, people living their lives and experiencing everything that I'm experiencing as well. He had always instead he began to really experience their humanity, which I thought was a really powerful moment. And you can see other examples here on this slide about, on the top right, it says recognizing my own privilege as a result of my inherent membership to different, privileged groups and having access to resources and opportunities that other people do not have, having access to generational wealth and opportunities and housing structures that my parents will pass on to me and that I will pass on to my children, and these expectations of education and opportunity that, because of some social systems and structures, other individuals within the city do not have. And then part of this final assignment here on this page also was a recognition of the assets, right? When they went into these spaces, they would always do kind of asset mapping. Who is there and what can they bring to the table and what are the strengths of these areas? Not just looking at what am I bringing and how can I fix particular situations. We never really use that type of language. Instead, we spoke about assets and how we can supplement so many of those assets. And oftentimes it was through those personal relationships. And so these opportunities really knock down personal barriers and assumptions about the people and experiences within the context of the particular city of Columbus in relation to privilege and oppression and systematic issues. And so what was really powerful about this course is that we studied all of this, right? It was a service learning course that kind of analyzed service learning. But at the same time, I think many of these same principles can be carried out in any other service learning or community engaged courses that aren't as focused on maybe neighborhood community development and systemic issues here in the city of Columbus. So I would be happy to speak to any of you further about this. If you want to go to the next slide. My email is right here, hooten.8@osu.edu. I taught this course for a couple of years. I learned a lot from it. That's what I'll say. I found some post class reflections from my first year, and the reflections were really interesting to see what my takeaways from year 1 to year 2 were, because there is a learning curve when we're doing a service learning community engaged course, because it takes some time to really understand and appreciate the nuances and how powerful some of these experiences can be for students that they certainly bring back into the classroom. So if you would like to connect, I'm more than happy to set up a meeting or a Zoom. So thank you so much for being here today. I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Our next presenter is Chris Ratcliffe. Chris, did you have slides you wanted to share? You should be able to share your screen if you
yeah, I have a couple. I'll probably just start chatting and go from there. Yeah, sorry I was a bit late, but it's nice to be with you all today. My class is, as you can see on the screen, it's Food, Ag, and Bioengineering 3200S. And this class was kind of born out of a couple of my experiences. I'm an engineering instructor primarily, and I taught service learning classes that were international. We went to Honduras and Ghana and various places, and there wasn't anything local. So this is one of the reasons I created the classes, to have a local version of engineering service learning. I was also really interested in food and farming and food security. And so that also kind of like got me interested in this area and pushed me towards developing this course. And went ahead and did a course design institute that really helped me kind of put some meat onto the bones of what I was thinking for it. And I developed some partnerships just kind of on my own time, just bopping around, doing some volunteer experiences at different organizations in the city, and developed close enough partnerships that I was able to kind of use them as the grounds for this course. And so over the last 4 or 5 years that I've been teaching it, I've been able to bring students into the fold, into 2 specific gardens that are working towards missions of increasing food security for neighborhoods, increasing STEM education opportunities. And it's been by far the most rewarding part of my teaching job at Ohio State, in part because the students, I feel, are very, very hungry for an opportunity to take the skills that they're learning and use them in a real world application. And I see them like just come alive when we are face to face with our partners, when we visit like the church where one of the gardens is housed, and when even when we just do Zoom things together, and especially when they're actually implementing projects. And so the way the course works is, in the beginning, the students learn some background about food security, some of the context around the work, which is also something that is often missing in engineering, which was very, a delightful thing for me to be able to talk to. I showed some of the similar maps actually that Zach just showed of like redlining and overlaying those with food security maps and food insecurity, or food deserts as they're commonly known. And so giving the students that like taste of the context, and then moving into, okay, well, how do engineers find a role within that context where they can do something that's useful, that's pushing the ball forward for these communities. We take an approach that is sort of like, when you're an outsider to a community and you want to help, we talk about how fraught with peril that can be, how many pitfalls there are and everything. And we kind of take an approach of, well, if we can support community members who are already doing this work, that is kind of a strategy that can work, right? Is where you're putting your faith into somebody who's from this place, who's been doing this work, who understands all the ins and outs and details. That's an effective way for engineers to kind of take part. And so they develop work over the course of the semester. They develop projects. We've done things with solar generation for electricity, and automatic irrigation and rainwater collection and things like this. And also STEM education. So with what we do, we try to mirror this with a STEM education tool, because a lot of kids come through these places, these spaces, and the community partners we work with want to engage those youth and show them what you can do in STEM and in agricultural professions and things like that. And yeah, let me show, I have a couple slides here. It's kind of an old slide deck, but I think I have one slide that is useful. And it kind of shows like what's a little bit of a bigger picture of how this has worked in my department. And so I partner with, I'm a senior lecturer, and I partner with a faculty who's doing a lot of scholarship around this, around community engagement work within engineering. And so we've kind of looked at like the partnership building aspect of the work, and how to do that well, and what kind of things go into building partnerships with community, because there's a long history of universities kind of messing this part up, right? Kind of saying like, oh, there's a grant, so let me grab a partner, and just like forget them when the grant dries up, or kind of steamroll them in terms of what the agenda is and what the desired outcomes are. So we think a lot about that in conjunction with the research that my colleague David Delane is doing. The course development then is done kind of within that context of how do you bring students into a relationship, right? And keep that relationship strong, keep the trust, even when, students might wildly outperform expectations, or they might come up short, things might come up, and, as you're doing the work. And so there's been some learning from that. There's some work on critical service learning in the published literature that's been very helpful. Very careful selection of projects and activities is really, really important. When I came into this field in engineering, service learning specifically, a lot of it was like the students get to choose what they work on, which is not how I would recommend it. I talk with my partner, thank you, very closely, and come up with some things that I think are approachable for students in a semester, but that actually fit a real felt need. And then of course there's like the feedback loops, making sure student outcomes are being met, and that the partnership is progressing as we want it to. And I guess I'm interested to know what questions folks have, but here's some pictures from the garden as well. We've also implemented a farm bot, which is a gardening robot. This is something that the partner actually like identified as a desire. It's something that I would expect like an engineer to put into a garden, because it's like an overly complex system when really you just need like a hoe and some seeds to grow food. But they wanted this because they wanted to inspire kids around STEM education. And what I've seen in this work is that I've had students come to me and say, this is like a life-changing experience, like taking this class and actually getting to meet people who themselves are heroic and inspiring, which I think is one thing that makes these classes work really well for me, is that my two main partners are people who like are just, you could just sit back for hours and listen to them talk about life story and their experience with what they do. And so, yeah, the impacts on the students I've seen have just been like phenomenal. And I have students regularly tell me that when they have job interviews, no matter what it is, no matter what the position is, this is the thing that they're always asked about is tell me about that. Tell me about what it was like to, work with like a community that was different from you, or tell me what it was like to design something for kids, whatever, their project was. And so I think it's bringing like a massive amount of value for the students, as well as for me, because for me as an engineering lecturer in the university, it wasn't immediately clear to me how I was going to pursue my own passions around things like food security. And I'm not even an ag background engineer, I'm an electrical engineer. And this provided that pathway for me. And so I'll say that, like, in doing this, if you're, I don't know if there's lecturers in the audience, but if you're anything like me, you got a job as a teacher at a university with zero training in how to be a teacher, right? My wife's a third grade teacher and we laugh about this all the time. She had to get a master's in teaching. Well, laugh, right? But she had to go into debt to be able to teach third graders. And I was just able to waltz in and start teaching at this level. And so the course design institute that I did with Claire and Teresa was like just an eye-opening experience for me, because I didn't really know how I was going to take all these things that were in my brain and put them into a structure for a course that students were going to be able to follow and help them be successful. And going through that process really made this possible for me and made the class like many times better, right? Just the concept of starting with what are the biggest things you want to get into the students' minds, and then building out assignments step by step from that was extremely beneficial. I think I'll stop there, but yeah, like I said, I'm very interested in any questions or connecting with anybody. I'm happy always to share my experiences more as desired.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. That's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So again, as we've mentioned a few times, if you do have questions that come up, please put them in the Q&A or hold them, and folks can unmute when we finish with our presentations. But next up, we have Dr. Nicole Patson.
All right, good afternoon. Thanks. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all of you for being here. And hopefully I can provide some information that's useful. Let's see, I always forget how to, I'm not up there. Okay. Stopped using a lot of PowerPoint in recent years. Sometimes forget how it works. All right, so I teach a course in psychology called Language Development. And I got interested in service learning as I was reading about supporting college students from diverse backgrounds, and specifically, since I'm a first generation college student myself, I'm often thinking about the needs of first generation students, especially in the regional campus context where we have a pretty high percentage of first gen students. And the literature shows that first generation students particularly benefit from service learning context. So that was sort of what drew me to it. I didn't have any experience before doing it myself. I had never even taken a service learning course as a student. And in my area of psychology, cognitive psychology, I don't think service learning is a very common thing. Although this language development, I do think that there are quite a few folks who do service learning. So one of the things, as I was thinking about adding this to my course, was I wanted my students to have the opportunity to interact with children, because a lot of children who are going through the process of acquiring language are doing very cool things. And the speech errors that they make are often indicative of the learning that they're doing and the cool knowledge that they've acquired so far. So when you read transcripts of people's speech in general, I don't think that really comes alive the way that hearing those things in real life can illuminate. So I also wanted students to think about how reading is related to the language development process, in part in an effort to sort of distinguish reading from speech and reading from language. Some of the goals of my course are to try to help dispel some of the misconceptions that people have about what children need to develop language, what kind of support is necessary. And so this is how this all fit together. I learned about an organization in Marion called Let's Read 20, which is a nonprofit that does a number of things in the community designed to address Marion County's low literacy rates. Let's Read 20, the name is from this idea that, this finding that when children are read to for 20 minutes a day, there are a number of educational outcomes, educational success. So they're better prepared for school, and they perform better in school, and those sorts of measures. So they're my primary partner. They are run out of the Marion Public Library. So I also wanted my students to have the opportunity to interact with not only the library, the nonprofit, but the library, and think about how libraries provide support for literacy support in communities. And I will be teaching this course again in the spring, and I'm going to be adding the YMCA as another partner. I'll sort of describe why in a moment. So the next slide is kind of an ugly slide, but just so I have something to point to talk about what my students were doing in the course. I also want to acknowledge that I have only taught this course as a service learning course one time, and the time that I taught it was spring 2020. And you might remember that some things happened in spring 2020. So unfortunately, that majorly disrupted this course. So we had planned, this here is a screenshot from Let's Read 20's website. And we had planned on students developing some research videos that sort of talk about how reading supports the language development process. Very sadly, the plan was to have the recording happen after spring break. So students had put together scripts and storyboards, but since we did not come back to campus in spring 2020, they never got to film these videos. The other thing that they did, and they did get to do, was participate in story time at the library. So the librarians hold a story time twice a week for kids. And my students were trained by the librarians on, how they approach story time. So how they read to kids, how they choose, how they determine what books to read. They do some activities along with the book, so that my students got to participate in that. And then after some training with the librarians, the students got to lead some story times eventually as the semester went on. One of the challenges that I found when I was teaching this is that the time that the library did story time was not a time that students on my campus are typically available. So the library was flexible and had created kind of a special reading time that unfortunately didn't attract a lot of families. So the students all did have the opportunity to read to kids, but they didn't get as much practice with that as we had all hoped. So this year, so when I teach it again in the spring, the librarians have been in talks with the preschool director at the YMCA, and they have wanted to bring a story time to the Y. And so this was an excellent opportunity for them to try to pilot working through bringing story time over there. And so that we're currently in talks about how to make that happen and how to make that work based on my students' schedules and the Y's needs and schedules. This year, we'll instead of the video project, well, they'll still be making videos, but the Let's Read 20 has just, it's not easy to tell from this photo, but what this is a photo of is they have created, there's a hiking path in Marion, and so they've created a storybook trail. So we will be working on the second, they just installed it this summer. So we will be helping them put together the next display, so the next book. So again, we'll work with the librarians to think about what the right book is for the community and the things that go through their thinking process when they're selecting books. We'll also be making videos. So again, this is small, but there's a QR code here that links to the library. So we'll be making some videos that these QR codes will link to those videos. The library would like videos of people reading the book. And we're also sort of talking about what are their kinds of things, sort of coming back to this idea about the resources that are on their website about reading and language development. We're talking through what might be most useful. So even though my semester was disrupted, I did find that the students really enjoyed working with the library, and the librarians were wonderful and just so supportive of the students in my class. So I remember one anecdote I can remember specifically that I'll share is one of my students, her parents were foster parents, and so she had lots of younger siblings, and she said, from taking this course and interacting in this way, one of the things she realized was that she would sometimes complain about doing homework and, oh, I hate reading. And she noticed that her siblings were picking up on that. And, and she wrote this beautiful reflection in her final essay about how this engaging in this course had sort of made her aware of how even just those kinds of, the way you talk about reading to kids matters as much as actually sitting down and reading to them. So that's one of the anecdotes I can share. So I was asked because I'm on a regional campus, just address, obviously I only teach on the regional campus, so I don't know, I don't want to claim any knowledge about what it's like to teach service learning as a Columbus faculty member. And I also think that probably my experience in Marion is unique to Marion. But some of the things that I find to be a little bit, that I think might be different, is that in the Marion community, people are less familiar with service learning because there aren't as many service learning courses being offered. And so negotiating and figuring out projects that fit the library's needs and also fit what I'm trying to do in my course, it has been achievable and it hasn't been a problem, but I think that there's a bit of back and forth, and especially in sort of getting, sort of thinking through what is achievable in a semester. I also think that it's a little bit challenging because, you know, these kinds of classes I can't offer this class every single year. As an instructor, we just wouldn't have the enrollment. So as both speakers before me mentioned, right, you want to be a responsible community, responsible in thinking about their needs. And so they were very generous and inventing a time for my students to come and read, but obviously that wasn't something that they could plan to have offered regularly after that. So we tried it and then we learned that we needed to do something different. So that's a challenge. And then the other thing is students most of them aren't actually local to the Marion community. And so one of the things I'm changing next semester is I'm actually going to have the reading time happen during the course hours. And I'm doing some restructuring so that I don't have to expect students to be available during a particular time during the week, which is not a time that my class is scheduled to meet. So getting them over to a service site at a consistent time, because that's what the community partner needs. I think the way to do it is to make it map onto the course time. But I think because there are fewer folks trying to do service learning, that I have found community partners to be very excited and enthusiastic about collaborating. They aren't inundated with people coming in and doing projects. And that means that I think students can provide really valuable services to the community partners. So like the other speakers before me, I'm very happy to share anything I can to help encourage you if you're considering doing service learning. I also wanted to mention the Course Design Institute, which I just found fabulously helpful. So as I mentioned, I wasn't super familiar with service learning when I kind of got excited to try it out. And I think that my first experience doing it was so successful because I had gone through that Course Design Institute. It really did help me to be able to not just get the instruction and go through the backward course design, which I found really useful, but also hearing from all of the other faculty who were in the Course Design Institute and thinking through, what their projects, how they were designing their courses and those kinds of things. It just was, it was a very good use of my time. So I encourage you to consider applying for the grant for that alone, but the money's nice too. So that's all I have.
Okay, great. Let me just go back here to bring up our, there we go. Okay. So that is our email address over here in the office, slearning@osu.edu. So Zach and I are actually both staff within that office. So we're the ones that monitor that email address, and we'll be reviewing grant applications and all that lovely stuff. Looks like we do have a couple questions. If I can get to the Q&A, move things around on my screen. Okay, so let's see. First question. For those of us on regional campuses, the S designation is campus specific, correct? We can develop an SL course specific to our campus that isn't necessarily taught that way in Columbus. Yes, that is true. Our service learning courses, S designated courses, we have, ones that are offered with the S on the Columbus campus, but may or may not be offered that way on some of the regionals and vice versa. And when designing an S course, it is definitely important to, collaborate with your department, your curriculum point person. They can help you figure out what that looks like when you're going to create a course in the curriculum system, and the different check boxes that need to be checked for which campus it's going to be offered at, and all that kind of thing. And you can also, I know some of our courses will utilize a pre-existing course number, but then add like a 0.01 S to indicate that that is the version of the course that's going to be offered with the S. Or if they don't want to do multiple sections like that, there can just be a 4200 regular and a 4200 S in the books. Yes. I don't know if any of you have any experience with going through, anything to share about what it was like to propose your course and navigate through that system. Feel free to share, but if not, that's fine. Okay, so then course. Okay, so Virginia's next question, this is a good one. Course enrollment and courses being canceled due to low enrollment is a big issue. You mentioned the Lima campus specifically, but that's actually, especially with these types of courses, that's a concern on Columbus campus as well. So did anyone have any issues with course enrollment, students shying away from a course that required this kind of extra commitment? Anything that you might have done to try to recruit students? Anything anybody?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this because I think enrollments are an issue on all campuses, but right now it's really a problem on regional campuses. I find that students don't know what that .s means, and it kind of freaks them out. So when I taught it the first time, I only had 5 students enrolled in it. Right now, my enrollment is looking a lot better. I've got 8, which is low. But one thing we've done in Virginia, I'm happy to share what we did on my campus. So I pushed to get the dean to recognize that service learning courses we should expect them to have much lower enrollments. And we have a document that sort of articulates why that should be the case and how that helps us also manage the extra workload. I don't know how low you get to go in Lima, but I was allowed to teach my class with 5 students. But what I've been doing this year is I have been targeting specific students. I've been talking about it in class, and in classes where it makes sense to draw other students from, and just kind of talking about what the work is like and assuring them that it's not actually extra, right? That the time that they're spending in my service learning class is not, it's not more time. And that's also why I'm making because it works for my project, I'm making a lot of the service activities sort of take place during class time. So that way they're not feeling like they have to schedule, time where they have to physically be. That's one thing. I don't think I have to do that. That works for my class, but those are, I think that it is a challenge. And on the regional campuses, it's very common for students to be taking classes across multiple campuses, which really limits the amount of time that they have to do outside, to do things outside. So it's a reasonable concern, and I think it's an additional challenge.
I have one thing to add about the extra commitment piece. I kind of reference this a little bit, but one of the reasons I started this local version of the service learning and engineering is because there were international versions, but they would cost like $2,000-3,000+ to do. And so I wanted to have something that was more accessible. And this comes up in the literature on service learning sometimes too,
where it's like, okay, if you have a student who's working a job or is a parent or has some other reason that the extra is just not going to work, we meet on Saturday mornings. So I say in my syllabus, and I say very clearly in class, the expectation is that you contribute to the project work. That doesn't mean you have to be on site. There's no grade associated with you showing up outside of class hours. It doesn't usually come up, but I try to make that clear to students that those extra things aren't like can affect your grades, so you can be a part of this class no matter what.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I will mention too, there's so many different ways to approach community engagement, service learning, especially with some of the innovations that we were sort of forced to think about during the pandemic. There have been a lot of really creative approaches. And so I think that kind of old school idea of the hands-on service activity, stocking the shelves at the food pantry, that kind of thing. I would suggest thinking creatively about whether that actually is the best option for your course, your students, your community partner. We have a lot of different creative ways that may work better for your student population that don't require them to be actually on site anywhere. And like I said, we have a lot of resources for that. And leading up to the grant application deadline, or honestly any time of year, regardless of whether it relates to this grant, our office staff is here to help support instructors to think through these kinds of issues, to think about, what activity would work, how do we make that work at OSU, all that kind of stuff. So let's see, we have some more questions. So we've got a couple of you who are actually already teaching courses that include some kind of community engagement. So yeah, absolutely. You can, so you'll want to talk again with that curricular point person for your department, whoever actually has access to curriculum.osu.edu to submit course proposals and things like that. There is a checkbox in that list of things about the course that says it's a service learning course. It'll carry the S. And you will have to upload a form that just asks some questions about how community engagement is implemented in your course, how you're having the students reflect on that community engagement. You can find that on our website. That would get reviewed by a committee of faculty members who we have that help us with those things. And then it would carry the S. So yeah, that you don't have to do the grant. You don't have to, honestly, you don't have to work with our office. We do like to, have conversations with folks just so we, can be supportive and help. Our goal is not to be gatekeepers, but really to serve as an extra layer of support, since we know that this pedagogy does ask more of instructors, of students, adds in the element of the community partner. So yeah, we're here to help. But yes, you can definitely add the S, especially if you're thinking about submitting your course to be part of the new general education scheme. Which actually I also wanted to bring that up as another factor in attracting enrollment. The new general education in the themes section. So foundation courses can be service S courses, but they don't get anything extra for that. It's just an option. But up in the themes section of the GE, there is a 4th credit hour that can be given to a course for using a high impact practice. And one of those options is to use service learning. So you get a 4th credit hour to work with when you're designing your course activities. And it's really beneficial for students because then they only have to take that one course to get their theme requirement taken care of. Otherwise, they'd have to take 2 courses in a theme, each being 3 credits. So that's something to think about. Those courses we think will be very attractive to students. So if your course might fit into the GE and to one of the different theme topics, you might consider designing it as a 4-credit hour course and applying for the GE. Let's see. And then, okay, I'm not sure I understand Carol's question, meaning X number of minutes of instruction per credit hour.
That one's my fault because I typed in an answer to her first one and I didn't know it would take it away. So I accidentally answered one.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's good. Yes, so we definitely encourage folks to utilize that same ratio of hours, time spent outside the classroom towards course instruction to figure out how much time. And as a few people have mentioned, the community engaged activities should not be extra. You should not just be tacking these on to a pre-existing course. They should be, if it is a pre-existing course, then, you know, you should be replacing some of the homework assignments, some of the readings, some of the things like that, and then using the engaged activity, pulling it in as like treating it as a type of reading, basically a type of activity that then is going to inform the rest of the course content and class discussions and things like that. So then David has a question about how the increased credit hour is reflected in faculty teaching loads in different units. That is a question I cannot answer. That would definitely depend on the department and how they assign instructional load. I really don't know how you all get, but I think probably different folks have different contracts too. That would have to be a conversation with either your individual campus or your department. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that one. But it is a very good question. Definitely something you would probably want to get an answer on before you would tackle this. So yeah, and that's something, just to say, as we wrap up here, we are now after 1 o'clock, so I do want to respect everyone's time. But I would just say, as you're looking at the application materials, and we would encourage you to start at least 2 conversations. One, talk to your department chair. Talk about if this is something that the department would support you to do, and make sure that, and think about, like, can it be, if it goes well, can it be included as like an elective option or some things like that to promote the sustainability of the course being offered into the future, and make sure the department's on board. And then we would also encourage you to start a conversation with potential community partners if you have not already. Yeah, so with that, I want to thank everyone so much, especially our 3 wonderful panelists. I love hearing your stories and the challenges, successes, and the work that you're doing here. Thank you so much. And thank you for utilizing this pedagogy, because we think it is truly impactful and special. And thank you to all the participants. Do, again, as you continue to work on this and think about this, and even if you're not going to apply to the grant, if you're just thinking about how to make one of these courses work or have questions about the new GE, anything like that, feel free to reach out to us at slearning@osu.edu. Thank you.